So this class, we will spend most of the time trying to understand first the history and origin of this spiritual texts and spiritual practice in Tibet, and also trying to find a source in India, trying to dig a little bit deeper into the historical aspects of the Lojong practice. And then next, we will then follow by who are the great personalities and the practitioners that introduced this teaching in Tibet. And then at the end, we will try to understand the general overview of this text. So this is what we are going to do for today. And then, of course, there will be a Q&A session. And from the next class onwards, we will be just focusing on one topic at a time, since it is 7-point mind training. So each week we will focus on one special point, trying to go deeper. And also inside the class, I won't be talking all the time, but after talking for some time, then we will have some reflections and do some meditations related to the just topic that we have covered, and also questions. So from the next session onwards, we will have question answer kind of 2 times, but for today, I will leave all the Q&A for at the end of this session. So now the first thing, I'm sure that all of you must have heard this wonderful term, Lojong, or the mind training in English, so many times. And the teaching by itself is such a wonderful thing that it is combined in just 2 words, Lojong. And the English translation is equally beautiful, mind training. And in order to understand that, first, we have to go back to one of the greatest personalities who brought this teaching to Tibet. And in order to understand that, we also need to know a little bit of the historical aspects of Tibet, how Buddhism came to Tibet. And so, of course, this is not a historical class, but I think sometimes it's important to know the background a little bit. So in Tibet, many of you might have some information about how Buddhism came to Tibet. In history, we talked about 2 parts when the Buddhism came to Tibet. We call it usually the first dissemination of Buddhism in Tibet, and then the second, or the first or the later. So the first one, of course, happens during the beginning of the 7th century, during the Tibetan monarch Songtsen Gampo. And he sent his emissaries and few students to India, to Nalanda University to study Buddhism. And then when they returned, they introduced the Tibetan script based on Devanagari, the Sanskrit language grammars, and so on. So that is another story. And then another monarch after him invited the first master from Nalanda University called Shantarakshita. So he came to Tibet. That's around 8th century, and late 7th to 8th century, he came to Tibet. And that was the beginning of Buddhism coming to Tibet. Of course, we know that if you look at the history, Buddhism came to China as early as 1st century. We have evidence that it came here as early as 1st or 2nd century. But in Tibet, it was much as late as 7th to 8th century. So Shantideva started the Vinaya, the monastic system in Tibet, and also wrote a very important text on meditation, Bhavanakrama, the stages of meditation that many of you might have studied. So, and the flourish of Buddhism in Tibet after this great master is actually categorized as the first dissemination of Buddhism in Tibet, according to the history. But the one that we are focusing now in this class will be the later dissemination of Buddhism in Tibet. So in the history of Tibet, one non-dharmic, we call it, a king came, and then so due to many politicals and the social reasons and his own personal things, he started to destroy the monasteries, temples, libraries, anything to do with Buddhist texts and scriptures. just as the same thing happened during the Cultural Revolution. And so for almost 200 years, from the 8th to 9th century, there were not you cannot even find a group of monks going here and there in Tibet. So Buddhism really declined in Tibet at that time. And then, so it was in 10th century or the 11th century when Atisha Dibamkara was invited to Tibet, to come to Tibet. So here comes the study of Lojong. So Atisha, we have provided you the links to read the biography of Atisha Dibamkara. So we have no time to go into details of each and every details of his life stories. But Atisha, basically, he was born in Bengal, the present day Bangladesh. And then he was one of the greatest teacher or the master in Nalanda University at that time. In Nalanda University, they say that the Nalanda University, a way that it becomes such a prestigious and important Buddhist learning center in India at that time. They have to frequently fight a lot of non-Buddhist scholars coming and arguing with them, and so they have to face different arguments, philosophical arguments, and so on and so on. So therefore, in Nalanda University, it is said that they have 4 gates on each direction, and then on those gates, they install or asked one of the top scholars from the university to guard the gate. So when the new non-Buddhist masters come and defeat, so they should be able to defeat it from the gate through debates and not allowed to even enter the university. And so the northern guardian, we call it, was Atisha Dibamkara. So Atisha was guarding the northern gate. So we can understand the stature, the experience, how learned Atisha must be in Nalanda. And then I do not have a Tibetan map here now, but if you have some idea, so Atisha went to Tibet from the western part of Tibet, we call it, from the Ngari Ladakh region nowadays through present-day Nepal. And so that particular king in that part of Tibet, his name is Jangchukwe. Maybe it's a small kingdom in the Ngari region. It must be a very small kingdom. And there were 2 brothers. And the Jangchukwe really worked hard. Actually, if you read the history in detail, he gave up his whole life, even sacrificed his own life to invite Atisha to Tibet. And so when Atisha was asked to come to Tibet, so there were a lot of resistance from Nalanda University itself that we need Atisha back in Nalanda. He is such a great master in Nalanda. Why should he go to Tibet? And Tibet is such a high altitude and difficult for, especially from someone like Atisha, who was born in the mainland India. So there were a lot of resistance from the Nalanda masters to send him to Tibet. But Atisha really made up his mind to go to Tibet and to help studying from the Ngari region to all over Tibet. And the first person or the first divine manifestations or deities that Atisha consulted before going to Tibet was the goddess Tara. So here, so the arrival of Atisha into Tibet was not just to restore the declining Buddhist teachings in Tibet, but it also brought with it a great new kind of, what should I say, cultural aspect or the heritage, very important in Tibet nowadays, what we call Avalokiteshvara and Tara. So many of you might have very familiar with these 2 bodhisattvas. So Avalokiteshvara in Tibetan we call Chenre Sik. So Chenre Sik, the Tibetan term, just means to gaze with your own eyes. So never blinking, but gazing at the miseries of the sufferings of the sentient beings with a wish to liberate them from suffering without even blinking. So that is the meaning of Chenre Sik. And Tara, or the drama in Tibetan, drill, the Tibetan term has an understanding of saving someone from falling somewhere or drowning or something. So the basically kind of a saver is a goddess who dedicate her life to other people. So Avalokiteshvara and the Tara, these two bodhisattvas are kind of the two faces of the same coin. They have to be always together, one with the compassionate form and other with the helping hand, compassion in action. So the reason why I brought this into the history of Atisha is that we do not have the writing proof of this, but according to what the many masters say is that Atisha first went to Bodh Gaya, the Mao Buddhist stupa. So many of you might have been to the Mao Buddhist stupa. If you ever been to the Mao Buddhist stupa, on the left side, if you're facing, there is a small Tara statue. And then nowadays people will just, from a distance, people will close their eyes and fold their hand and make a wish or prayer, and then they try to walk towards the Tara statue. This is what we all do now. And we say that if you pray, if you're able to walk with your closed eyes and right in front of the Tara statue, your wishes will be fulfilled. I don't know whether that's true or not. So, but this is a practice that we do. So the significance of this goddess Tara statue is that Atisha made a prayer before this statue, before coming to Tibet. And then this Tara is also called self-arising or the self-speaking Tara. And we believe that the Tara told Atisha that if you go to Tibet, the amount of teachings that you can, through your teachings, the amount of the benefits that will come to Tibet is enormous. It will be 10 times greater than you staying back in Nalanda. But that will have a very strong negative effect on your lifespan. So your life will get shorter by, I think, around 10 years. I'm not sure now, around 10 years. So if we try to take it upon our own self, I think nowadays, even me or all of you, I think 10 years of another 10 years more on this planet, I think we would choose that. So, but Atisha was not like that. He said, I don't mind this. So if my going to Tibet will benefit them, I'm definitely going to Tibet. So that's how the story of how the Atisha came to Tibet in the 11th century. And so the Jangchuk-U, the Dengari, the king, when he first met Atisha at the border, so I don't want to go into the details. So we say that he requested Atisha in a very something different from what any other request a master for teachings. Usually when you meet His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, or any other great teachers, everybody just go and with the folded hand and ask them to give us the most secret teaching that you have never ever given to anyone. We want the most effective teachings. Like this is what we all been doing all the time. Do you have some secret instructions or mantras that can help me personally liberate from these things and so on and so on? So what we are doing is we are always looking for some secret teachings, something that by practicing it in a short time, we can have some realizations and so on and so on. But Chandrapur, the Dengari king, was something different. And he requested Atisha that we do not want complicated teachings. We do not want any Vajrayana teachings from you, which are so complicated. We only want a teaching which will help our heart, or which will help us understand the karmic law and its effect. So kind of very basic teachings that he requested to Atisha when he met Atisha for the first time. So, and upon that request, Atisha wrote Bodhipada Pratibam, the lamp for the path to enlightenment. So that was the kind of the most important text that he wrote in Tibet. It was a very short text, not very detailed, but basis of many other great teachings that came to Tibet after that. So the reason why I'm also want you to look at this text, if you have time, is it's a very concise text. And the first line of the text, if you read, you will find that Atisha refers to Jangchobu as a noble student. So in Tibetan, we read it as Loma Sangbo Jangchobu Yikul Gyurbe, which means having requested or having urged by the noble student Jangchobu. So the reason why Atisha referred to Jangchobu as a noble student is because the way he requested him to teach was something different that Atisha himself never being asked, even in Nalanda. Everybody wants very important teachings from him. So that's why Atisha taught Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment text. And I wanted to give you one important fact related to this teaching, is that there is certain debate about the Atisha and his special lineage in Tibet. Many says that the teachings given by Atisha and his lineage were purely non-Vajrayana, so which means purely Sutra path, nothing to relate it to Vajrayana. It seems so if you look at the mind trainings teachings or Lamrim teachings or the great books or the teachings that his students wrote after that for almost 4 to 5 centuries until the 15th century, you wouldn't find many important Tantra or Vajrayana teachings. So that is a very important aspect of the historical thing, but it is not true that Atisha never gave any Vajrayana teachings. Even if you read the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, at the end, he has a very brief 1 or 2 words on the Vajrayana teaching. And also, some of you might have received, if you receive some Vajrayana empowerment from His Holiness or some other masters, there is one empowerment called 16 drops of Kadam. And so this actually comes from Atisha. So this is just one point that I wanted to make here. So this is a brief history about how Atisha came to Tibet, and then how he gave teachings, and then after him, this great tradition called Kadam tradition began in Tibet in early 10th century onwards. Now, the second most important personality that we have to know in the Kadam lineage of the teaching is Dromtemba. So Dromtemba was the chief disciple of Atisha. And so the teachings of the Atisha that he gave in Tibet, how they put that into an institution in Tibet, how that came into as a school of thoughts, a proper disciplined philosophical system in Tibet. Because we know that there are many important teachers who give teachings here and there through their own practice, but many of those just end up as just being personal teachings and practice, but not a particular discipline formed after that. When I talk about particular discipline or institutions, I'm thinking about the different sects that we have in Tibet, Sakya, Kagyu, Gelu, Nyingma, those things. So Dromtemba started this monastery called Radeng. So this is a little bit history. I hope some of you don't get bored. But Radeng Monastery was kind of the first monastery that he built in Tibet. And from that, the Kadam tradition began in Tibet. So this also becomes very important in the historical aspects. So now let's think one more about why do we call the teachings of Atisha Kadam teachings. So Ka just means the direct discourses of Buddha, and Dam in Tibetan just means instruction. So many times what happens to us and to all of us is that there is a disparity, a gap between the the wonderful teachings and our own practice. We all know that. We are not able to connect to those teachings on a personal level. For example, when we face certain difficult phases in our life, even though we are aware of the wonderful teachings that can be used to solve those personal problems at that time, but what happens many a time is, even though you know on a different level, but on a practical level, there is still a huge gap, right? So through Atisha, what they did was, they say that the reason for that is that we are not able to realize that all of those teachings, we put them on a superficial level, different level, but do not consider that as directly connected to one's own personal instruction. So that's why, even though the many teachers and there are so many books available, but people think that is still not a personal teaching for me. So I wanted to go and find a master to get a personal teaching that will suit my own thing or help me. So this is a mistake, Atisha said. So in all the texts, there is always personal teachings embedded in it. We have to activate that capacity within us to connect to take that as one's own personal instruction. So that is the reason why the second term Dham in Tibetan is another phrase called Dhamma, which means personal instruction. So the teachings of the Buddha, how to convert them into one's own personal instruction, so that when you go through difficult phases, we can directly apply that and then practice it. So that is the reason why it is called Kadam teachings. And after Atisha's arrival in Tibet, we all know that a new genre writing system or new teaching began in Tibet. We all know that Lamrim Chamo, I'm sure all of you must have read Lamrim Chamo by Tsongkhapa, the great treatise on path to enlightenment, a very thick book that Tsongkhapa wrote. So that book was actually based on the text of Atisha, the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. So in both of these texts, what they actually deals with is try to first understand the people's way of thinking. So the peoples have different mental dispositions and they have different levels of thinking. Some think in this way, others think in that way, and then there's a third neutral one also. So depending on those three different ways of one's mindsets or ways of thinking, so three different teachings were given, right? For example, just a few days ago, we were talking about some special aspects of Buddhist teaching. And someone in my class was saying that, one special aspect that Buddhism is different from the Christianity is that in Christianity, they often really frightens you that if you do not do something good in this life and achieve salvation or something, you will be born in the hell. So it's a way to frighten you and then make you become religious, right? And they said that part we do not find in Buddhism. But then there was another student who objected, no, that's wrong. Even in Buddhism, we have even more detailed description of hell. So I think that the hell part is sometimes a little bit problematic in Lamrim teachings, but I think it was designed and helpful for some kind of people. Some kind of people, when the way to lead them to a teaching is, some people, it becomes a little bit effective when they were frightened a little bit. So when a certain kind of positive fear arises in them, that if I do not do that, then that may happen. So they end up doing that. It is similar to maintaining a healthy lifestyle that we do nowadays. So we all know that maintaining a healthy lifestyle, eating right food, doing exercise, and all those things are difficult. We ignore that most of the time. But sometimes when you fear that one of your friends with diagnosis with some cancer or something due to an unhealthy lifestyle. So that when we see that, it is a kind of a positive fear that comes in your heart or mind, and that makes you adopt a healthier lifestyle. So this is very similar to how the health realm and those things were presented in Lamrim teachings. So the main thing I wanted to point out here is the Tsongkhapa's writing on Lamrim, which became such an important text. So that text is also something like a ready-made for all of us, how to practice from day one until the last day. So in other texts, you may have to look at different texts. You have to read this book and take something from this. You may have to read the other book and take something from this, and then combine to make something that suits one's own personality. But Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chemo, generally it says is that it's a ready-made for you to practice in order. You do this first, you do that second, and you do that third. So, but in the history of Tibetan literatures and writings, Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chemo was not the first Lamrim text. There were many other Lamrim texts before, but none of them were as comprehensive as the Tsongkhapa's Lamrim. So also just think about the history. Tsongkhapa came only in 13th century and lived until the mid of 14th century, which is much later when we are talking here about Atisha in the 10th century. So Lamrim tradition, many of you are aware of the structure of the core book and so on. It's a very systematic practice. In some way, also a little bit complicated, that you have to first practice the small scope person's path, and then graduate it to middle scope person's path, and then to finally to the Bodhisattva's path, right? So there are 3 levels. I'm not going into detail. We can discuss this in the coming classes. But then through Kadam teachings, especially with Drom Temba's studying of writing monasteries and listening to his master Atisha's exchange of talks, they come with the new set of practice called Lojong. So this was a revolutionary in the Tibetan history. So Lojong was not designed as a what should I say, a package or a course or a book for somebody. Lojong was actually the students of Atisha take notes of the conversation that happens with Master Atisha and his fellow students. For example, if I give you one example about, there's a story when Drom Temba, the chief disciple of Atisha, was feeling very sad because at the last days of Atisha. And so Atisha was feeling sick, and so he's about to pass away. And so Drom Temba and Atisha, they share such a cordial and warm teacher-student relationship, something similar to a father or a mother and her child. So Drom Temba was lying on the Atisha's lap and crying with tears rolling. And Drom Temba says, Drom Temba told to the Atisha, tells Atisha that you have been our light, you have been our sun that saves us from this darkness, you have been our inspiration, my father. So that's why in Kadam you will find these father teachings and the son teachings, And then he asks Atisha, what will happen when you go away, when you are past, when you are no more there? What's going to happen? We will be all without guidance. We will be all without someone to guide us. So what should we do? So at that time, Atisha responded that you don't have to cry. You don't have to feel sorry. From now on, you have to make the Kadam text, the Lojong practice, as your personal tutor, your personal instructions, and your personal manual. So this alone text, what we have discussed and what we have said in this text, there's nothing more than even someone like me, by being alive, also could do more than what is already written in the text. So this is, so the whole of the Kadam literature, if you read, it's also, you can also find in English translations. If you read these stories, all of those stories were such inspiring stories. Most of them were very short stories exchanged between the teacher and the student. And such a sad story. I received the whole oral transmission from my teacher, Geshe Chekawa, when I was in Geshe Monastery in India. And so it's a thick book, so we spent around 1 week. So every day, spending around 6 to 8 hours listening to our Genla. So here, basically it's an oral transmission, but from sometimes he will tell us the story a little bit. And then he will cry. He will cry so often when he goes through these teachings. It's so moving, this kind of teachings. And then, as His Holiness also say, my teacher also tells us during the story that, so these teachings are for everyone, he says. That's why we call it like highway. In Tibetan, we call it Shumbawa, which means like a highway where everybody can go. There's no restrictions. But if we think about other teachings, for example, some secret Vajrayana teachings, they were not meant for everyone. And sometimes when you read the very, what should I say, some part of the sadhanas or Vajrayana text, sometimes you even feel a little bit more tense instead of feeling a little bit more calm when you especially see the wrathful deities and all of those things. So it makes you, if you are not ready for those texts and teachings, you may end up feeling a little bit more agitated. But Kadam teachings are not that. So this is the beauty of Kadam teachings, that in Tibet, what we call Lagdu Langdeva, which means something that easy to carry in your hand. It's not too heavy. If the object that you're trying to carry in your hand, if it is too heavy, it may fall down. It is the right size and the right weight that is suited for everyone. So in the following weeks, we will also try to read 1 or 2 stories every week, so that we can reflect upon those things. And one special difference in the Kadam teachings with the Lojong teachings is that most of these Kadamba masters, we call it, starting with Dromtemba, Chekawa, Potowa, all of those masters, they were not professionally, what should I say, monastics or students who study this text from young age. They were adults, grown-up people who later, those teachings, meeting with the Dromtemba and the Dromtemba and Atisha, transformed their life, and they became masters, Kadamba masters. So the encounters that when you read in the teachings were so funny sometimes. It's very childish things that you can find admiration in, satisfaction or the beauty in those teachings. That is one thing I wanted to say. Now, in the final part for today, I wanted to begin a little bit with what we meant by Lojong. So we have covered the history part a little bit, and also the context or the content of Lojong teaching a little bit. So what do we mean by Lojong or mind training? So we will try to understand that a little bit. So again, the mind training is a very beautiful translation. And mind, when we speak about mind in Tibetan, Lo, on a wider perspective, Lo or mind can mean any kind of sensorial or the mental cognitions and the perceptions that we have in our day-to-day life. For example, when we talk about sensorial things, when you see when you look out of your window and when you see a beautiful weather with flowers, tree, so that is a visual perception. So having seen that visual thing or having heard a beautiful music, that may bring a certain calmness to your mind. So there's two levels that we can see, the visual perceptions or the auditory perceptions. Through that, the effect that it can bring to your mental level. So there's two levels that we can all understand. So the mind training here is actually the second part, not the sensorial level, but to the mental level. We're talking about it. And mind, why do we, the second part, train? What do you mean by training or jong? So the Tibetan term jong has few different meanings. The first thing is jong means just to train. Just to train means if something is untamed, and if you need to tame it, it is called train. Or if you are preparing for a stage show or anything, we have to do a preparation, that is also called jong. That is one example of understanding of Lojong, means trying to train our mind from a very ruly or untamed position to a more tamed level. That is one way of looking at the Lojong. Second, Jong also have a connotation or understanding of purification. So now this is a little bit more Buddhist perspective. When we talk about purification, it is one of the 7 aspects of the practice. Purification, we believe that in the millions of the lifetimes that we have, no need to think about our previous lives. Even in this life, of course, we did a lot of good things. We have accumulated a lot of virtues. That is no need to mention. At the same time, we have also accumulated some negative karmas. That is for sure. We may have hurt our near and dear ones intentionally or unintentionally, or we may have harmed animals and other beings intentionally or unintentionally. All of those will have some negative imprints on us. So we have to accept that also. None of us are pure as gold. So that's the reason why purification is so beautiful. The good thing is that there are means to purify that. So purification here means something which is stained now. So how to clean that? If we have a stained water, a muddy water, we may do multiple levels of filtration so that that water becomes clean and drinkable, right? So similarly, how do we purify our mind? So the teachings on how to purify our mind from a stained level to make it unstained and clean, this is also called Lojong, okay? But the means of how to do that are the 7 points that we will discuss. And again, this is related to Lojong, or the mind training. Again, is very much related. It's entirely based on meditation practice of shamatha and vipassana. Shamatha and vipassana, we all know. For example, in the shamatha practice, it is often our mind, which is always distracted and agitated, is taken as a metaphor of a wild elephant that runs here and there all the time. I mean, in the text, it is nothing. We are talking nothing about the negativities of elephant. Elephant is such a cheerful animal, so lovely. We all love elephant, but the context that we are trying to discuss here is sometimes, due to it's actually the fault of humans. We torture the elephants too much, and we, in the excuse of taming them, we harm them so much, and then sometimes they become angry. So that's understandable. So when they become angry or when they are so wild, untamed, so they run here and there everywhere and not being hooked on or focused on one particular place. So our mind is also metaphor or explained in the same way that we are unable to focus on one thing. So it's going here, there, everywhere, unable to focus on one thing, unable to concentrate on one thing. So how to put your mind focused on one thing at a time is also called Lojong. So that is also one meaning of Lojong that we will be discussing. So this is the basic kind of introduction to our Lojong class. And so now for the next weeks, we will be reading through the text. And actually the main text is very short one. So I'm sure you all have a copy. If you do not have, we will send it to all of you. So the root verse is very brief and very easy to read. But the teachings that lies within those outlines, they're so deep that even in unwrapping one line, so it has a great weight and meaning to it. And this particular text is attributed to Chekawa, one of the. Chekawa was also one of the primary students of Atisha, and Dromtamba being the senior student, and then Chekawa, Botowa. So there are a few other important students within the circle of Atisha. But even then, we say that the text may have been actually written, not directly written by Chekawa, but kind of notes that he took down, remembering or recollecting all the exchanges, the question and answers with his master. And if you look at the story, it's actually very beautiful to see how they spend their life during with Atisha. So Atisha first came to Ngari region, and then he also traveled a little bit further to Tibet. He stayed in Tibet for almost 13 years. Then he passed away in Tibet. And if you look at the stories, it seems as all of those notes were kind of just conversations that they have with Atisha and each other. All those conversations were put into writing. And Atisha himself was such a very disciplined monk and disciplined master. And Tibetan nomadic peoples were a little bit wild, as if you know the Tibetan culture a little bit. They were the way that they dress up. In Tibet, you might have seen some parts of the Tibetan monasteries, the monks really dress quite, what should I say, with silk, these things, and, riding on horse. So if you look at some of the monks from their outfit, from their robes, it's not so disciplined and peaceful to look at. So Atisha had faced the same encounter when he first came to Tibet. So when he crossed the Nepal border, and then there were a lot of people coming to receive him with everybody on horses, with flags and drums, beating drums, and so on. And Atisha was really frightened. Oh my God, what's happening? Am I being kidnapped? So he was really frightened. And then they have to explain to him, no, this is the reception for you. We're here to receive you and welcome you. And then Atisha said, no, this is not the way a master is received in the Buddhist tradition. And so then all the monks returned, they went back, they changed their robes, and then come in pure monastic robes, and then extend another round of welcome to Atisha. So right from the beginning, when Atisha came to Tibet, the first thing he did was he changed the way the monks in Tibet, the monasteries function. So that we can see that he came to Tibet to change the way things run in Tibet during those times. And so in the next class, we will read through the text. We won't read through the text today because I will leave some time for question and answer. But the next one, the next part we will be reading is first the line which comes as first train in the preliminaries. So this is there's only one line for that, train in the preliminaries. So how do you train yourself in the preliminaries? What do you mean by preliminaries practice? So preliminary, I just wanted to explain briefly so that next week when we all gather together, we can prepare for it. So preliminary term you might have heard in Tibetan is called Ngondro. So Ngondro is such a famous practice that you can find in all the Tibet different traditions, and in Nyingma traditions especially, we have very strong practice of Ngondro. They really pay so much weight and attention to the practice of Ngondro. So preliminary means that before you actually consider yourself ready to receive the teachings and practice all the way to realizations, what are the things that you need to do beforehand? So the preliminary can be understood from different contexts. If we just take an example of a one-day retreat, many of you must have done a lot of retreats. And if we just think about one-day retreat, how do we prepare for our retreat? Maybe the day before retreat, we prepare the house, we clean the house, we arrange the cushions. So in Tibetan traditions, you make the thomas, you make the water bowl offering. So these are all preliminary things. On the actual day, you can light the incense, you can light the butter lamp, you can do prostrations, and so on and so on. So if we think about one-day perspective, one-day retreat, or one session, the thing that you do before your actual sitting down is called preliminary. This is from one day's perspective, retreat perspective. Now, if you think about a larger context, then the preliminary can be involving with all the 7 sets of offering, what we call, including prostration, purification, and reading the texts, receiving the oral transmissions, and so on and so on. In Vajrayana teachings, receiving the empowerments, staying in retreat, offering mandala, all of those things are preliminary practices. So therefore, in the next class, we will we will get a little bit from Lamrim about the preliminary practice that we have in Lamrim. And also, as most of you are familiar, but we will still go a little bit deeper into prostrations. What do we mean by prostrations? How to do prostration? How the purification is an important part of preliminary practice. And then mandala offering and reciting Vajrasattva mantra as means of your purification, and so on and so on. So this is for the next week. I think that's enough for today. I've been talking too much. So if I'm talking too much about history and if you feel bored, I'm sorry for that. But else we can have some questions now. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask for the next 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rinpoche. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your virtual hand.
It seems no questions. That's very wonderful.
May I ask? I wanted to ask about oral transmissions and the significance of those. Why are they so important to receive from masters?
The oral transmission, yes. So I think one has to also know so what type of practice one wants to do. So oral transmission is definitely important, but not for everyone, I guess. But the general idea about the oral transmission is in Buddhism, the emphasis is always paid on transmission and the lineage. So what we call as the uninterrupted lineage. So uninterrupted lineage is considered very important in most of the teachings. So if you if you receive a teaching today, for example, on this 7-point mind training, usually what a Tibetan monk or a nun belonging to a monastic institution will do is that they will try to find out from the teacher to whom they receive, what are the lineage of that teacher, that particular teaching. And at the beginning of those teachings, the teacher will often tell the students that I received this teaching from this master. And this master received the teaching from that onwards. So the thing is that this 7-point, if we talk about this particular text, let's say this is written by Chekawa. And so from who does he taught this text? For the first time, he taught this text to somebody. And then that person onwards, so the lineage till today, the lineage that you received is unbroken. So why then it is important is we think that one thing, the teaching that you're receiving is an authentic one. The lineage is all about whether things are authentic or they are later added to it. So when we maintain a pure lineage, the authenticity is well preserved. So what you receive the teaching today is what the original author taught. So even though there's a different masters in between, but the teaching has been continued without any flaw. That is the meaning. The metaphor, a beautiful metaphor that we often give here is that if all of us here are in line, and if I passed you one stone like this, if I pass you a stone, so I pass to you and you pass to the next person and next and next and next. So the stone will go from the first to the last person, right? Similarly, if I put a water into a glass bottle, and then I empty the glass bottle and pour the water into a copper to a clay to some vessel. So in both this metaphor, the important thing that we notice, even though in the first case, the person who holds the stone changes. The first may be Mr. A, the second may be Mr. B, then the third Mrs. B, and so on. But the stone remains same, right? There is no change to the nature and the quality of the stone that is being passed from one person to another. Similarly, when you pour a water from a glass jar to a copper, to a silver, to a gold, to a clay, even though the vessel that holds the water changes in its quality, shape, size, but the water remains the same. So therefore, even though the teaching has been taught by the original master and it has been taught to another until you today, even though the line of the person who received the teaching is different, but the teaching itself is the same. So this is the metaphor that we usually refer to in the preservation of oral transmission. That is one thing. Now the second thing is you preserve the lineage, you have an uninterrupted, authentic teaching that received from the teacher. Third one is we call it Jilab Chenpo in Tibetan, which means it's precious. Because what you receive today has been passed on by so many great masters over the centuries. So it is not just a simple printed text, but it is a text that has been studied, practiced by all of these masters. So there is something preciousness and the sacredness, Jilab Chenpo, in this lineage when you received it. So therefore, generally in the practice, one is not allowed to give any teaching without receiving the lineage, proper lineage. So you have to, in Tibetan, one Tibetan particular genre of writing is, you might have heard, or Tobi or Senjik, means all the masters have a book, and in that book they will write, on this day from this master I received this teaching. So all the teachings that they received, they put it on a book. And His Holiness the Fifth Dalai Lama has a very thick volume of Senig, we call it, the list of the teachings that he received in his lifetime. Gange Chugyu, The River Ganges Flow, is such a beautiful book that you can read it's also in English. So when you read that book, what happens is, you know that from how many teachers the fifth Dalai Lama received teaching. And from all different traditions. So this is so wonderful when you read this kind of books. So therefore, what I'm trying to say here is that this is a practice that the Tibetan masters really pay so much importance, but it is not something new in Tibet. It was practiced in India at that time and even followed today. Any other questions?
Thank you, Rinpoche. And we have a question from Henna.
Hello, Rinpoche. My question is about training in the preliminaries and how to do it in practice. Is it like reflecting on death, for example, or precious human birth, and how to reflect, like what kind of questions should I ask? I sometimes struggle with the questions. It's supposed to be simple, but sometimes it's hard to choose. So thank you.
Thank you. So the preliminary, we will go detail into the preliminary practice next week. But how to practice or put that into, practice the preliminary is, you have to engage with those practices. It's not just about thinking about that, but some of those practices you need to have a physical engagement with the practice. For example, when I say offering mandala, so it doesn't have to be that, I'm just picking on an example. So in one of the Ngondro, the Nyingma traditions really pay so much attention is the 400,000, right? So 100,000 mandala offering, let's say. 100,000 mandala offering is, you cannot just virtually, or you can visualize of offering, but visualizing in your mind with the proper motivation and physically offering the mandala are two different things. So you have to do it physically that one. And with respect to that, I wanted to tell one story of Tsongkhapa's life story. Tsongkhapa was such a brilliant student when he was even at very, very young age. When he was 7 years old, he memorized a big book of Vajrakilaya. And the masters were astonished to the intelligence of this kid, How can he do that? And by the time he was 20, 27, he already wrote many books. And by the time he was 30, he has thousands of followers. He was traveling here and there and giving teachings and so on and so on. But at the late 30s, when he had a vision of Manjushri asked him you need to do more preliminary practice. So Tsongkhapa was at the first astonished, What do you mean? Because I think that I achieved quite a lot in my life. I've written books, I have hundreds of thousands of followers, I can give teaching. And so why should I need to do preliminary practice now? It's a wrong time. That's what he felt. And many of his students, when he tell them that I'm going to do this practice and I'm going to the retreat in mountains, in Tibetan we call it chadil. Chadil just means leaving the worldly things and go to retreat. And his students also tell him, are you really doing the right thing? There are thousands of students who rely on you for your teachings, and now you wanted to go to the mountain. And Tsongkhapa says, I have to do it. And then he went to a retreat, and then he did mandala offering. And the prostrations and the mandala offerings were the two main practice that he did in Volca, that particular place when he was in retreat. And even now, I have never been to Tibet, so some of you might have been. So, but people say that even now, if you go, you can see those stones where Tsongkhapa offer mandala. So when we say mandala, Tsongkhapa do not have silver or the copper or beautiful mandala that we have. No, it was just on a rock. So he uses hand to offer mandala on a rock, and all his hands, the flesh were all worn out and the bones coming out. So so we can feel that Tsongkhapa can really manifest everything in his mind and do the offering. But for him also, he need to do a physical practice as a part of purification. And then he also did thousands of prostration to the 35 confession Buddha. So physical, sometimes the preliminary has to be physical. And sometimes it has to be verbal speech when you have to recite certain mantra. Let's say if you have to recite the Vajrasattva 100-syllable mantra for purification 100,000 times, Om Benza Sadhu Samaya Manu Balaya Benza. You cannot just visualize and say, oh, I'm done now. You have to do it 100,000 times. So that was for a purpose. And so, yes, what I meant is when we say preliminaries, there are different kinds. And as you say, thinking about death or remembering about death and life is also a very important preliminary practice, because this is related to the meditation on impermanence. So meditation on impermanence is the beginning of, usually we say, how do we distinguish that somebody has entered the practice of Lojong or Lamrim, or a real practice is whether that person strictly engages in the meditation on impermanence or not. So especially related to impermanence of death. So when you meditate on the impermanence of the death, not the death of other people's and the beings in this world, but your own death. It's really scary, right? So when you think about your own death, it's not easy. We were saying it, I'm saying it. It's the most difficult meditation, I guess. Yeah, so was that your question? Did I left out anything? Anyone else? Maybe we have time for one more. Or else we can wrap up for today.
I just wanted to say thank you. It was I think it's very wonderful to hear this, the background story, the kind of to see how these teachings came about. It's nice to have that framework for it as also. But you mentioned this book, is it Father and Son? Was that the published? I've heard it before mentioned. Is it a publication of stories? I didn't have time to write down the you suggested some.
Okay. So we do have from the Library of Tibetan Classics, led by Geshe Chekawa. So through Wisdom Publication, they have translated the first two volume of Kadam traditions. So you can find the book similar to this one. It's a thick book, but also the book is called the Book of Kadam. So
Book of Kadam.
Book of Kadam. And then the second book is Mind Training. Mind Training. The collective works of mind training, I think. These are the two thick volumes. If you get time to read those stories, not necessarily now, but even later on, it will be wonderful.
Ah, great. They are in English and from Wisdom publication.
Yes.